Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. Yeah. So if I'm unhappy with what is happening, entering into policy domain is one of the most important and vital way. When we talk of policies, it's not just about the government. It's not about government officers framing the policies and governors. It's also about society. It's also about community. Policies which are drafted keeping a common person at the center, and policies where common people are part of policy making, implementation become easy, because then people think that this is our policy and this is for us, and that's how policy should be drafted and implemented. There is a huge gap between policymakers and people on the ground, masses on the ground. So we need people who understand ground reality, rather people who have lived this reality, and people who want to bring a change. And to bring a change, policy is the best tool. So there are a lot of think tanks, there are NGOs, there are corporate sectors which want policymakers, and I believe that it's not just government's responsibility to draft the policies. So these various sectors contribute to government's vision. People who have ear to ground should be in policy making.
Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Frontiers of Governance and Public Policy, brought to you by School of Law and Governance, Vishwakarma University, Pune, where we explore the relevance of policy education across sectors. In today's episode, we are set to explore policy education as a tool for those who aspire to make an impact through their work, who aspire to contribute to systemic change through their work. And we are delighted to have with us to join in on this discussion Dr. Radheshyam Jadhav, a senior journalist and a social researcher who brings with him a very unique perspective of how policy is experienced at the grassroots. Dr. Jadhav is the senior deputy editor at the Hindu Business Line. He's a 2 times recipient of the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism, the Statesman Award for Rural Reporting. He's also a fellow of many prestigious fellowships, including the Reuters Institute at the Oxford University. He's a Shivani Fellow at the London School of Economics. He's the Asian Journalism Fellow at NTU Singapore. Dr. Jadhav, thank you for joining in. It's a privilege to have you here with us.
Thank you.
So, over your career spanning more than 2 decades, you have extensively covered public policy, you have extensively covered government policies and governance systems. We would, to start with, like to know what is the grassroots perspective on policies? How is it? How does it impact how people function, or how does it impact the lives of people at the grassroots?
Yeah. So, Unmesha, there are different kinds of realities we face in society, as individuals, as society, as community, as members of the society and community. So, there's political reality, there's social reality, there's subjective reality, there's objective reality, and there is lived reality. So, lived reality essentially means that people who are affected by the policy, what these policies mean to them. So, for example, we have been talking about poverty eradication for decades, for ages now. But still, poverty prevails, poverty remains. So, what's wrong with the policy and what's wrong with implementation of these policies? If we dig deep into this question, then we'll realize that when policies are drafted, people who are affected by the policies and for whom policies are drafted are not taken into consideration. Is always trickle-down theory which we implement in policies, that somebody drafts the policy and then these policies are implemented, and then it is supposed that it will trickle down and benefit to the people, to the masses, to the grassroots. We talk about women empowerment, and there are hundreds and hundreds of policies at the central and state level where we say that we are going to empower women. Now, the crux of the matter is that you cannot empower anyone. Empowerment is a process.
Right.
So, as long as process continues, empowerment happens. The process ends, there is no product. So, when we draft policies for women empowerment, quote unquote, we have to keep in mind that women themselves have to empower, and then they have to take forward battles of their lives. Government and other agencies can just facilitate in the process of empowerment. If we are not able to codify the process of empowerment, how we are going to draft the policies, and then at the end of the day, we are going to bring in new policies. So when we talk of policy and grassroots realities, we have to keep this in mind, that it is the people, it is for the people whom we are drafting policies, it is for the people whom we are putting up these frameworks, and it is the people who are going to be affected, benefited or not benefited by the policies. So while drafting policies and implementing those policies, building these frameworks, I think the grassroots realities should be considered, and that is not happening, I feel.
Right, right. So what we're saying here is that when making policy, first of all, it is a very nuanced process, because like you said, you spoke about women empowerment. There could be other objectives with which other policies come in.
Yeah.
And when drafting those policies, one has to consider, first of all, the target population that you're making the policies for.
Yeah.
And then, of course, how would you actually create an impact? And for that, you would need to dig deeper, like you said, into the realities of the grassroots. So in a democracy like India, of course, you have kind of dwelt on it in the earlier point as well. But in a democracy that we are, why is public policy important? In the sense, why is it important that we understand public policy? And how does it impact us in our day-to-day lives? If you could substantiate with an example, if you could share an example with us.
So if we talk from the perspective of the person standing on the lowest ladder of the society, and from his or her perspective, if we try to understand and analyze the policy, then we'll realize. I'll give an example. Way back in 1969, there was a drought in Maharashtra. And in a small tiny village of Visapur in Sangli district, which is in western Maharashtra, few farm laborers, workers went to a Gandhian leader. His name was Vittal Sakaram Page. And they went to him and they said that they need some work, because they are not getting any work because of the drought. And then Mr. Page asked his wife how much money or saving they have. She said it's 700 rupees. And then the next question followed was, in 700 rupees, for how many days we can create employment for these people, and how many people we can employ? The answer was around 20 people, and 15 to 20 days employment we can provide. Believe me, that was the beginning of one of the largest and biggest social network safety scheme in India, which was later converted into employment guarantee scheme. So he went to Chief Minister of Maharashtra, and then he said that government has to keep aside some budget, and then we can provide employment to workers. Later, that employment guarantee scheme was taken up by the central government, where NREGA came into place, which was named after Mahatma Gandhi, and recently the central government renamed it as G Ramji scheme. When the scheme was started, or this idea came into his mind, the idea was that he wrote that one day this scheme should end. And when the scheme should end, when people are self-reliant and they don't need to dig roads and work in 40-degree temperature. And that day, we are going to raise flags and we are going to celebrate. So that's how scheme started. We are in 2026, the scheme still is on.
Right.
The point I'm trying to make is that when we're discussing about the grassroots reality and we were discussing about people who are really affected by the policies, if we keep these people at the center of the policy framing, then it's going to help. Otherwise, you have a different paradigm. I have a different paradigm. A person standing on the lowest ladder of the society has a different paradigm, right? So we have to take up that paradigm and rework our policies.
Right. So while thinking about pondering over this, I also was thinking that India is presents a very unique example. We are a country with a huge population. We are a very diverse country, and of course there would be some similarities in the challenges that we face across states, but even then we have some unique set of challenges across states. So the challenges would maybe, the nature of the challenges would change across a few kilometers in India. And the example that you gave, in fact, made me think that, because I was pondering over what can be then the, solution, or what can be an approach that we can have in such a unique situation. And it could be that solutions come from the ground and then they are absorbed into policy, like you said, like in the case of NREGA. So that's actually a very insightful thing to discuss here. So as young professionals, because today we see that a lot of young professionals want to create an impact. In fact, that is the reason we have chosen this theme for the episode. There is this desire to create an impact because work satisfaction is something that the millennials and the Gen Zs are actively seeking for sure. For those who want to create this impact, and for those who want to make a change, can policy education serve as a tool to them? And how can these young professionals then formulate or get into the system and formulate policies which are responsive to the needs of people?
So there are two parts of the question. I'll answer the first part first. I think that there is a groundswell of resentment when we are talking of Gen Z. So what happened across countries we have seen. So there's indignation, there's a simmering anger. Now, what is the response to this indignation? How do we respond to this? How do we respond to this anger? How do you respond to this agitation within? One way is, of course, you become passive, let things happen, you're not bothered. Then there's submission. You completely submit and surrender. That is one option. Then there is aggressive response. It's not a response, it's a reaction. And then it converts into violence, what we saw in Nepal and in Bangladesh recently.
A revolution, perhaps. Yes.
But then there is an affirmative response to the situation. And policy, entering into policy is the affirmative response. Like Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. So if I'm unhappy with what is happening, entering into policy domain is one of the most important and vital way to answer this indignation or agitation. So this is first part. And second part, as you said, when we talk of policies, it's not just about the government. It's not about government officers framing the policies and governance. It's also about society. It's also about community, as we discussed. So there are a lot of think tanks. There are NGOs. There are corporate sectors which want policymakers. And I believe that it's not just government's responsibility to draft the policies. So these various sectors contribute to government's vision. So today you have various corporate houses. I'll not name the corporate houses. We all know that big corporate houses have their own policy makers, the team of policy makers. So there are opportunities. So if we have to initiate a change, we have to be part of the solution. Not just raising questions and indignation is going to solve this.
Yes. So what we're saying here is that policy education can offer them a tool to, channel their aspiration of making a change. And they can be a part of the, and because, of course, what you said also takes us to another point, which is that the policy making process and ecosystem has kind of evolved over the years, and now we can see that it perhaps is more participative and you have more opportunities to contribute to it. Yes, sir. So we spoke about NREGA, of course, and we've spoken about different examples. Could you perhaps tell us about about a policy that was designed well? So if you could tell us about policy that was designed well and implemented well, because a gap in design and implementation is something that systems across the world have felt, perhaps, but if we could have such an example.
So I'll refer to a couple of policies. One policy I remember in Maharashtra was the Gram Swachhata Abhiyan, if you remember.
Yes.
And that was a policy which was drafted with participation of the grassroots leaders who are elected representatives in panchayats. And why that became success? Because people were part of the policy framing. So all these villages which participated in cleanliness campaign, they were not competing actually, right? They were implementing their own policy. This again was taken up by the central government and the government of India under leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi when they launched Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. I think this is one of the most important campaigns, schemes or policies that came into existence. And the change you see on the ground, it matters because if we think from a woman's perspective, again, I'll suggest that we put this perspective or put this paradigm from a woman standing at the lowest ladder of the society. For her, having a toilet is probably the most important thing in her life because she had to answer nature's calls early in the morning or late nights, right? I have covered hundreds of stories where women were suffering because they had to control answering nature's call.
Yes.
Yeah. And right from infection to abdominal problems, these women were suffering. So when the policy was drafted, the person standing on the lowest ladder was at the center of the policy making, and it actually worked. Women welcomed this policy, and it was women who ensured that toilets are constructed. It was women who knocked doors of Gram Panchayat to seek information of this scheme. So Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is one of the policy, I think, which has actually made change on the ground. Also, right to education, right to information. Again, these were the policies which were initiated by the civil society. And civil society actually worked with the government to draft these policies. And now NGOs and civil society activists are actually ensuring that right to education is implemented, executed in schools. So, to add to the list, PM Surya Ghar Yojana. Again, this is a policy where the poor household is not only getting free electricity, but they're also contributing to the nation's GDP. Yeah. So, I think the policies which are drafted keeping a common person at the center and policies where common people are part of policy making, implementation become easy because then people think that this is our policy and this is for us. And that's how policy should be drafted and implemented, I think.
Yes. So this reminds me of a very interesting concept in sociology, which is of intersectionality.
Yeah.
When you spoke about the problem, about the paradigm and about the problem that a woman at the lowest strata perhaps is facing.
Yeah.
So you're talking about intersectionality because she's not just a woman, but she's a woman belonging to a certain economic class, to a certain social class, etc. And it made me think that to really understand policy, to really be in a position to comprehend what is happening around me and what is the solution to the challenges around me, I need to be aware of such intersectionalities. I need to be aware of such concepts that these different domains can expose me to. And that kind of brings me to the next question as well, sir. So for a young professional who wants to, venture out making some impact and creating some change, would formal policy education help such a person, or would taking formal policy education be a good choice for a person going about having a career in this?
Just connecting this part to what we discussed earlier was that generally people believe in ideologies, right? Nothing wrong in believing in ideologies, but then ideologies are not theories. Ideologies are quasi-theories. Yeah. So one has to believe in theory. One has to believe in theory because one, if you believe in theory, you are open for criticism. If you believe in theory, you are learning. If you believe in theory, you are open to receive ideas. You are open for critical discussions. So when you actually study policy making or policy and governance, you are moving away from your ideology and you are trying to understand theories. That's what education does. I think that is the ultimate aim of pedagogy. That taking students from ideology to theories, so they have different perspectives. And in policy making, I believe that I have to move away from my own perspective, my own paradigms, and I have to understand the scenario, the situation from others' perspective. And why policy and governance education is necessary? Because today we have very few people who have a connect to the grassroots and who are policymakers. Otherwise, I personally believe that there is a huge gap between policymakers and people on the ground, masses on the ground. So we need people who understand ground reality, rather people who have lived this reality, and people who want to bring a change. And to bring a change, policy is the best tool.
So another thought that comes to me at this point is the private sector also does not really operate in a vacuum, right? Whatever is happening around socially, economically, those events are bound to impact the private sector as well. So even though essentially these are profit-making entities, because they are impacted by and they take benefit also of the surroundings around them, what is the role that they can play in effective policy making and policy implementation? Do we have any examples where they have, some case studies where they have played a role in policy implementation that has been that can be studied as a best practice?
Yeah. So when we talk of policies, let's divide this in two sections. One, when we say private sectors, they're private entities, they're corporate houses.
Right.
So as we discussed earlier, almost all major corporate houses in India today have their own policy makers group, because not only they facilitate or support government's policy making, but also they draft their own policies, and they have mechanism to submit these policies to government. And these private sectors are having a huge impact on government's policy making. That is one part. Second part, when it comes to execution of policies, government will create an overall framework. But when it actually comes to execution, like we were discussing about this PM Surya Ghar scheme. So the companies working in renewable energy, they have drafted their own policies when it comes to execution, because when you take a policy to the grassroots level, to the ground, you have to work with people who are part of the socio-cultural system. So for policymaker to understand the process of socialization is important, because then you cannot isolate people from their environment, from their culture. So there has been thrust on the fact that people working in corporate or private sector should not only be aware of policies, but they should have capacities and capabilities to draft policies. Second, the way you interpret the policies, because the way policies are drafted, it's like a government jargon. There are many times misinterpretations. So to study these policies, to interpret these policies, to implement these policies, there are teams in private sector for students who want to be in private sector, in corporate sector. This will give an additional edge. This education of policy and governance is going to help them to facilitate their entry into the corporate sector or private sector. So I think that government has its policymakers, but then again there is an entire ecosystem out there where there are not only opportunities to get a job, but also to make an impact working in private sector. So you don't necessarily have to join the government or be an IS, an IPS officer. You can still be in private sector and still be a policymaker and implement those policies.
In fact, sir, that's the beauty of the times we live in. Maybe just a couple of decades ago, if as a youth I really wanted to make an impact, all I could think of was join the civil services. But today, because the process of policy making has changed, has evolved, and because there's so much exposure that that youth has, that they can actually contribute. But coming back to the private sector, are there examples where can you throw light on some examples where the private sector has actively participated in solving policy implementation problems? For example, the intersectionality that we spoke about, because it's a complex issue. And perhaps the government may not have the bandwidth, or even if it has the bandwidth, would help if you have someone out there to kind of support when it comes to policy implementation. So are there examples where private sector has taken up this role actively?
Yeah. So we're discussing about the farmer suicide scenario.
Yes.
I'll give an example. We have to understand, as I insisted or reiterated rather, that we don't live in vacuum. We are not in isolation. We are part of a socio-cultural ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah. So when we are part of this society, we are also surrounded by various structures. So take example of a widow farmer. And here she's not just widow. She comes from so-called lower caste. She's poor. She is abandoned by her family, and she's vulnerable to all kinds of exploitation. Yeah? Right. So all intersectionalities come into play. Right. So when this woman, we hope that she should be benefited of government policies. What are the hurdles in this policy? So first is institutional oppression. I'm not saying discrimination. I am insisting on the word oppression because then it's a continued process. Yeah. So there is an institutional oppression. So all institutions, formal and informal institutions, play a role in oppression. Then there is, of course, ideological oppression. Then there is interpersonal oppression when it comes to the society. There is informational oppression where she is blocked in a way that no information reaches her. There is ideational oppression because the way we treat our women, that okay, they don't understand anything about agriculture. So there is ideational oppression, and at the end of the day, she internalizes this oppression. And I think this is one of the most dangerous stages in her life, because once you start thinking that okay, oppression is a norm, then there is no aspiration, there are no dreams. Yeah, you surrender and you succumb. Now, government has drafted a policy. We have policy in place. When you are implementing the policies, all these oppressive structures come into play. So, how this policy is going to benefit this woman? So, there are NGOs, there are organizations which actually do hand-holding, who actually implement these policies. And to implement these policies, how they answer these oppressive structures is by drafting their own policies. Again, these are formal and informal policies where these policies come up as a part of socialization. So, government drafts a policy. When implementation starts, implementers, we hope that government is going to implement, but that doesn't happen. Institutions not necessarily facilitate this implementation, rather they become hurdle, impediments. So, these NGOs, private sectors, draft their own policies for implementation. And I think this is very important because at macro level, we have policies. At micro level, there are impediments. So, for policies, we have to draft other policies. And here, the informal sector is going to play a major role in future. That's what I think.
Yes.
So, just to give you another example, there's International Rice Research Institute in Philippines, and they work with women farmers across the countries. Now, this institution has a team of researchers and policymakers, and they draft policies for women in Asia and Southeast Asian countries. And as we are discussing about the lived realities, many of these researchers come from the grassroots. Yeah? So, they are exactly aware how policies are drafted, what are the impediments. So, when they work with different governments, they are ready with the inputs. And this actually strengthens not only policy framing, but also policy implementation. So, when we were working with this Rice Research Institute in Marathwada region, we started with the research. So, before framing a policy, and remember that none of these researchers were part of the government, but many of them had already studied policy making. So, when we started qualitative and quantitative data collection, we came out with a model of socio-economic and technical bundles. So, it essentially means that there is a technology, and access to that technology,
Hmm.
using that technology, and hurdles women face in all these things. So even for a simple step like bringing women out of her household and take her to the training center, it needs to draft a draft of communication policy. How you are going to communicate, how are you going to convince. Yeah. So at every step, we need to understand policy. We should be able to draft policies.
Yeah.
So there is a misconception, I believe, that when we say policy, we just attach it to the government and government
Right.
policies and implement it. It's not so. In every walk of life, if we want better understanding, better comprehension of the society, if we want to be vigilant citizens, we want transparent and honest society, then we should be able to look through what is happening, go through what is happening. So that's where I think policy education plays a major role. It will make you a better citizen.
Right. And so the policy gap that we speak about of design and then implementation, or policy making and then the gap between making and implementation, it is not just the onus of of course the government machinery is, it is a primary what do you say, a key performance indicator for the government machinery, but it is also a place, a space where private sector can play a role to ensure that that gap is filled up through through their own innovative means. And in fact, so this is the approach we at the School of Law and Governance have had. At the School of Law and Governance, we have, while creating our curriculum for the Masters in Public Policy program, we have tried to ensure that we give the participants an exposure to all, like you said, the theories from all perspectives, from sociology, from economics, from development studies, and this is our effort, in fact, that we would be able to give them the right kind of exposure. So talking about young professionals, in the age of AI, in the age of automated data analytics, what do you think are, or is it creating new opportunities for future policymakers and for young professionals looking to enter this this sector?
So we are in a disruptive age.
Right.
As we are witnessing that AI is having a huge impact on all sectors, all walks of life. But at the end of the day, again, it's my personal opinion that AI is going to facilitate, and we are going to be a change maker. Right? AI is not going to change everything. AI can play a role, good assistant. If I use a AI tool and ask it to draft a policy, from where it is going to draw the information, right? Yeah. So again, I'll reiterate, I'll insist that people who have ear to ground should be in policy making. Why? I'll tell you. We are facing this problem of farmer suicide, and it's like a pandemic. It's spreading, right? Maharashtra is one of the top states where highest number of farmers end their lives. So we have these policies in place, right? So we have loan waivers. After every few years, central government, state government comes with loan waiver schemes. Again, in Maharashtra, we're discussing about another loan waiver. We have MSP policy. We have PM Kisan. We have mechanization policy. Everything is in place. And now we are also seeing that AI is being used to facilitate this change, and AI is being used to draft these policies, and everything's okay. But why nothing is changing on the ground? Right? So we need people who are well immersed into the grassroots reality.
Right.
Second, these tools, technologies are of course going to be useful, but at the end of the day, we are talking about people. We are talking about human beings. Essentially, technology and culture has to go hand in hand, and only then we will be able to come to some logical conclusion when it comes to policies.
Right, sir. So, a key takeaway from today's discussion is that change is a responsibility of all of us, and policy education provides us the tool that all of us can harness, irrespective of whether we're from the public sector, the private sector, or the social sector. Thank you for joining into today's episode. And for more such insightful discussions, stay tuned.